Welcome to episode 150 of the Half Point Per Podcast. I'm your host, Evan Riggs, joined as always by my co-host, Dalton Willie, and our producer, Johnny Pham. Guys, this is our last episode until February where we will not have football games to talk about. We are, as of this live show, 8 days away from the start of the NFL season, when most of you listen to this on the podcast app, a week or less from the start of football season. Of course, the Jayhawks play tomorrow. So, we are here. Football is here, and I just could not be more excited.
It's time. I'm ready for everything I've ever thought to be unaffirmed in the first quarter of every game I watch, and to call a lot of coaches really dumb when they don't play the guys that we're going to talk about later today.
I hope that all of the guys who are my guys at least get playing time. That'd be pretty bad if we had a my guy who didn't play.
Yeah.
Can't imagine we've ever done that before.
Well, injuries, I'm sure we've had a few. I mean, I think Darren Waller was a my guy. Do we count last season as a play?
Well, look. Sky Moore may or may not have been a my guy or a sleeper. I can't remember which, but he was on one of my lists last year. That's like my all-time bad call.
Yeah.
Although I think he's at least going to make the Chiefs. Can't say the same for Kadarius Toney.
He made the roster. Rest in peace to Kadarius Toney. He still hasn't even picked up yet, so
don't worry, Dalton. He's a talented playmaker. A lot of teams are lining up to sign him. The talented playmaker story is not finished yet.
Yeah, CFL season starts in like 8 weeks. So,
okay, we're gonna get to some really fun stuff later in the show. This is our My Guys episode. For those not familiar, we've done sleepers, we've done busts, we've done breakouts. These are the guys that we want to leave every draft with. These are our guys, regardless. Regardless. It's less about where they're going ADP and more just like, yeah, I want that guy on my team every time I draft. Dalton and I each have 4 of those. But first, Dalton, we do have a couple of news items to get to. Actually, like all from today, news items to get to. So we can be pretty brief here. But let's just start with the 2 quite old running backs who both found new homes today. Dalvin Cook is headed to the Dallas Cowboys in the most Jerry Jones signing of all time. Now we have Dalvin Cook and Ezekiel Elliott. And then in Kansas City, we have Samaje Perine, who there had been a little bit of smoke that the Broncos were trying to trade him because the Chiefs wanted to trade for him. They knew that the Chiefs were interested, and they did not want that to happen. Not because it's again like that's what puts them over the top, but they, Broncos don't want to help the Chiefs. Makes total sense, obviously. But which of these do you think will matter more for fantasy this year? Dalvin Cook to Dallas or Samaje Perine to Kansas City?
Easily for me is Perine to Kansas City. We know Dalvin Cook is completely washed. Like we saw last year. I mean, at one point he got cut and was looking to join a championship contender as if he was the piece. And I think he joined the Ravens, didn't he? I believe it was the Ravens. And he didn't play once for them in their playoff run.
Was he on the team throughout the playoffs or did he get cut? I honestly can't remember. That's how forgettable his time was.
Yeah. And I mean, going back to 2 years ago in his last year in Minnesota, we kind of saw the signs. Perine has never been an elite producer like Cook, but last year he had 50 targets. He was relatively good in the passing game. And if you're just asking me which one of these guys is going to have at least a couple impactful fantasy weeks for you, it's Perine because he doesn't one-to-one fill the McKinnon role, but he's a good pass blocker and he's good out of the backfield, which was the part of the Chiefs running back room that they really didn't have much of outside of Pacheco. So I think he'll have some standalone value and could be a interesting pick should Pacheco miss any time.
What he kind of reminds me of is I remember it didn't last long because he got injured when Mahomes was in Kansas City. He played for the Chiefs previously, but it reminds me of Spencer Ware, where it's like this big-bodied third down back who's just like the bouncer in the backfield for Mahomes when we're passing the ball. I say we, Chiefs fan. That's kind of what the Perine thing reminds me of a little bit. And I guess I agree with you. I'm on the Perine side of this. I actually saw I saw a hilarious tweet today or yesterday or whenever Dalvin actually signed. I can't remember. That was like, once you see the medicine ball videos come out, which we've seen the Dalvin Cook medicine ball videos, you know that guy is washed. like every time when there's a video where it's a medicine ball, you know that guy is washed. And that's kind of where I'm at with Dalvin Cook. I'm with you on all of the signs we saw last year and a little bit in his last year in Minnesota.
But Cook could be good for that running back room. Last year, he was there and ascended Brees Hall into RB2. So Rico Dowdle, maybe a top 10 running back. Maybe just some mentoring coming in.
Well, I was going to ask you. So my thought process for Pirine over Cook is I'm a lot more confident in Pirine being the Chiefs' number 2 running back than I am Cook being the Cowboys' number 2 running back. Is that kind of where you're at too?
Yeah, and that entire Dallas backfield at this point is such a mystery box, and it's not a good mystery box, no matter how it plays out this season. That if Cook even gets like 25% of the snaps, no one's going to be fantasy viable in that offense, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm.
And if anything, he just detracts from any need or want to draft Dowdle or Zeke at this rate. When McKinnon feels like he fits such an obvious hole that this Chiefs offense was
Pirine.
Yeah, sorry, Pirine. That the Chiefs offense was looking for in training camp from Imani Bailey and from Deneric Prince, that neither of those guys really complimented, and even Kadarius Toney, who we put out of the backfield a couple of times. And that Pirine can be that pass blocker the missing Jerick McKinnon piece will have, and hopefully has similar Jerick McKinnon performances for Kansas City.
Yeah. And I mean, for me, like I think probably the number one question that people are going to ask about the Pirine signing is, does this impact how you feel about Pacheco at all? And my answer is still no, because I didn't know for sure if they were going to go get somebody or not. But whether it was CEH or, maybe Carson Steele or, insert veteran here ends up being Samaje Perine, I never thought that Pacheco would be like 85% of the snaps and, just playing all the downs like some people thought, because, the Chiefs are a team that they want to play a 19 to 20 game season. So while Pacheco's going to play a lot, I never bought into the idea of like, this guy is getting every touch and he has every role always, and no one's ever coming in for him on important downs.
Yeah. And I agree with that, because the Chiefs needed somebody behind Pacheco. He's not a 90% workload back, and that's not how Andy Reid's run this offense since Mahomes has been in town. So I don't think he's going to take any of the workload away from Pacheco that we're looking for, the meaningful snaps. Maybe he's going to miss out on a few targets here and there, but you're still getting the RB1 on a top 5 NFL offense who's going to get red zone work behind a very good offensive line.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Next up is really just like a vibes check here. Jamar Chase and Brandon Ayuk, neither guy practiced today. I should mention CeeDee Lamb has since signed his long-term deal since we podcasted last, so there is no longer concern there, which is good. But this is the last time we're talking to people, Dalton, until all drafts are done. What are we supposed to tell people about Jamar Chase, whose coach said all of these great things yesterday, and I guess Chase was out there for some of practice, and then today he wasn't, and his coach was like, I may have misspoke. And then Brandon Ayuk, who I don't know. We know as much as a rando, obviously, when it comes to what's actually going to happen, but how do you even approach this in your fantasy drafts right now?
Bad vibes, man. Bad vibes. First of all, starting with the Bengals and Jamar Chase, this is an organization that has historically not paid their players sufficiently and has been really reluctant to do so. There is an incoming cap situation with the Joe Burrow contract that they're going to have to work through. They have enough money going forward to pay Jamar Chase. I have a sneaking suspicion, based on the way he interviews, that Jamar Chase thinks he should definitely make the most money in the NFL. Not a wrong thing to think, but I don't know if he deserves Justin Jefferson money.
I think he does. I think if you paid him the exact same contract that Jefferson got, I think that's fine. And Lamb was right, but a couple million below, right? He can't go lower than Lamb. So that's his baseline, which makes this both tricky for the Bengals, but also we have a definitive line in the sand that we can draw, or that Chase and the Bengals can both kind of draw and decide if they're going to step over that line or not.
Which is probably bad for the Bengals for waiting on just this contract, because CeeDee Lamb getting signed before Jamar Chase is laughable in so many ways because of how dysfunctional Dallas has been, signing their big three in Dak, Parsons, and Lamb. But it's just not good when the coach doesn't know when he's going to be out there and tells me that the organization isn't speaking truthfully to everybody involved in the matter, which can make these processes a lot more difficult in long-term contract negotiation. And if he's not out there week one, then we have alarm bells going off.
And like, if that at that point, if that happens, who knows, right? Like, it could be Chris Jones, where he's not out there week one, but then signs a deal, comes in, and is immediately great, and it's mostly fine. Obviously not Chris Jones for fantasy purposes, but just real life purposes. And it could be Le'Veon Bell, who just we thought like, yeah, he'll be there at some point, and then he just never was.
Yeah. And on the Ayuk situation, this was mentioned on The Athletic, but the 49ers are acting like they're a two-time Super Bowl winner and can disregard player concerns. This going across both Trent Williams and Brandon Ayuk. And this is not Brock Purdy hate. We've been very positive Brock Purdy fans on this podcast. Losing an all-pro human being left tackle and an all-pro wide receiver is not insignificant. Let's
rank it real quick. If you had to rank the three, let's say five, because the Niners have so many. So let's rank the five most important 49ers. Trent Williams, number one, I think. I think you can make the argument for Christian McCaffrey, number two. I think you can make the argument for Fred Warner, 3. I think you can make the argument for Brandon Ayuk, 4. And then I think it's Deebo Samuel, and then like maybe Kittle, Purdy.
Or Bosa.
Yeah, or Bosa. Bosa. So bottom line is like, these are 2 of your 5 most important players, probably.
Yeah, well, let's not forget, like the right side of that line was a problem last year, and they anchored it with how good Trent Williams was able to play and a lot of double teams to help their right guard and right tackle. Now, they signed Dominic Pooty, who I'm excited about. I know you're excited about because you're wearing a KU shirt. But you're starting a 3rd-round pick at offensive right guard or left guard, and you're asking a lot out of a Shanahan gap scheme that has a lot of weird zone plays, a lot of different screen plays, and you're not going to have anybody on that offensive line at this point who's considered a bona fide like blue chip behind a quarterback where a lot of the concerns about Brock Purdy have been, if you get to him, he can't make his reads. And then you're going to take away the most reliable read in that offense. It's not good. It's not good. And if they don't have either of these guys out there on week one, I am going to take whoever they're playing, which we can talk about next week, but I'm going to regret that if they're playing like the Dolphins.
No, they have they play the Jets.
Oh, the Jets defensive line against a Sands. Wow.
Dalton is all in on Aaron Rodgers. You heard it here first.
No, I'm taking the Jets, though. The last thing here I wanted to talk about real quick, Evan, that we didn't put on the list. Are we feeling a little weird that Jalen Waddle hasn't practiced in 4 weeks and is wearing a non-contact jersey a week before game?
Yeah, I mean, like, you've got that going on. Is Odell on the PUP? Or
he's on the PUP. They have 4 active wide receivers.
He's either on the PUP or going on the PUP. Like Malik Washington, kind of a sick dart throw at the end of drafts. And obviously, if he's out there in Dynasty, go get him. But he probably is not.
Maybe the Devon Achane playing wide receiver wasn't a joke. Like the way this Dolphins wide receiver room is shaking out right now, but not good feeling there for a player who is often injured and often concerned with soft tissue injuries in Jalen Waddle.
Yeah, and real quick on the previous 2 guys before we move into the my guys here, like. I don't want to say I'm avoiding those guys because it just depends on cost. I'm probably shying away from them at what I would have taken them. Chase, I had at wide receiver 1. I probably have him more like wide receiver 5 or 6 right now. Ayuk, I had him at 10. I'd probably bump him down, 4, 5, 6 spots. something like that. But really, like the more actionable advice right now, I think, is I'm pretty in on betting on Debo Samuel, George Kittle, obviously Christian McCaffrey. That goes without saying. And like, look at Cincy. Yeah, I'm good on a shot on either running back, and then T. Higgins could potentially be a really nice value at like wide receiver 26 or whatever it is he's going right now.
Yeah, well, and one of the other guys in the Cincy room we'll talk about later today is one of my guys, but I I'm not going to not draft Ayuk or Jamar Chase. In all honesty, like I think I'd still prefer Ayuk over Jamar Chase because Jamar Chase is not getting traded.
Ayuk over Chase?
Not in like I would take Ayuk 7th overall if Jamar Chase was on the board, but I would sooner skip Chase at cost and take Ayuk at cost because Ayuk could still get traded. I don't know if he'll sit out the whole season one way or another. I could see Jamar doing that, and he still has 2 years on this deal, and there's no way Cincinnati is trading Jamar Chase.
Yeah, and the thing that I keep thinking is going to happen with Ayuk is, and I think this is what the Niners keep thinking is going to happen too, and it hasn't yet. This is the year. This might be the last great chance this core has to win a Super Bowl. So like, this guy's going to show up eventually. Like, well, he'll show up, he'll play, we'll get a deal figured out, or he'll go sign somewhere after the season. Like, I think that's what they keep thinking is going to happen. I think it's more likely that he just shows up and plays on his current deal than Chase does, but that is like total gut feel speculation. Obviously not any amount of sourcing done in as far as that goes.
Yeah, and it is unfortunate that there are so many superstars right now who we can't rely on for fantasy, especially when they're picked this highly.
Yeah, but some guys we can rely on, Dalton. Let's get to our my guys list. As I said off the top here, these are guys who we are in on at cost, maybe even wanting to reach on them. Whatever. We love them. We want them on our teams. I'll let you lead the way here. We've got 4 each. Who is your first my guy?
Yeah, I went ahead and went with Kyler Murray here because it's really hard to get a quarterback with Konami code upside, the rushing and the passing. And being a fantasy superstar in the sense. Kyler Murray is not like a top 8 quarterback in the NFL right now, but what he is he's consistently a top 8 quarterback when he's on the field and playing in fantasy. Mm-hmm. So over the last 3 years, he's one of 5 quarterbacks to average over 20 points a game. The other ones include names like Patrick Mahomes, Lamar Jackson, Josh Allen, and Jalen Hurts. So it's really hard to have that kind of production, and you're getting him at a pretty significant discount at QB 9 right now. Last year, when he returned, they had the 9th best EPA per play in this Cardinals offense. He improved his skill position group. You get a second year of Michael Wilson not being asked to be a wide receiver 1. Obviously, the addition of Marvin Harrison Jr. gives them a lot of added help there. And Jonathan Gannon showed he was a very, very strong coach when it came to 4th down decisions. He was first in the NFL on going for it on 4th down, which maybe bad for the team, but great for fantasy. You get prolonged drives, you get shorter fields for the other offense to score to bring your guys back out there. Those are all major pluses for Kyler Murray. And then you have this rushing offense last year. Last year, this entire offense from week 10 onward, which was Kyler Murray's return, was 4th in explosive run rate. Now, a lot of that comes from James Conner being 7th in explosive run rate, but Kyler Murray busted off some big runs, and now he's a year removed from an ACL tear, which means we can bet on him even more to be successful and to do these things effectively. So I just can't get away from drafting Kyler Murray because as much as I love a guy like Anthony Richardson, the market has already baked in all of his upside, but Kyler Murray's being taken at like a very low price. Like it's not.
You said QB9 is his price, right?
Yes.
So we talked about Kyler a little bit on the divisional preview show. So I have this. His quarterback 9 finish last year in points per game was the lowest since his rookie season. Obviously, that's him coming off of an ACL tear, picking up like in week 9 and shaking the rust off and then having some decent moments fantasy-wise down the stretch. He's never been below a QB7 in his other non-rookie, coming back from torn ACL seasons. That obviously doesn't mean that's always going to happen, but like he has a track record. He only trails Lamar Jackson, Justin Fields, Michael Vick, Jalen Hurts, Josh Allen, and Cam Newton in rushing yards per game. Those are the elite of the elite rushers, and Kyler Murray is right there with those guys.
Yeah, and I think it says it all that like the mystery box that I want from Anthony Richardson is a Kyler Murray season. That it's hard for me to make the argument that you should waste draft capital on Anthony Richardson in the 4th, 5th round when Kyler Murray's there in the 7th and the 8th round, and he's a more proven just player in regards to that.
I mean, plus he has Greg Dortch, right? Like, come on.
Yeah, Dortch fever. But yeah, I don't see how the Kyler Murray thesis fails unless he gets hurt this year.
See, I was with you all the way up until that because now I feel like you just fixed it. But yeah, he was very much under consideration, but I had a strong feeling you were going to pick him here, so I didn't want to double up. But he very easily could have been my guy for me as well. A guy who I think is a repeat. I think I've had him on my guys before. Always been a fan. That's DJ Moore. You know, he's going wide receiver 19. I have him wide receiver 14, so I'm a little ahead ADP wise, and I thought that his price might change after we saw Caleb Williams in the preseason, because that's usually what happens. We see a rookie quarterback play well in the preseason, his price goes up, and if he has good weapons, those guys start to see a little helium in their rank. But that he's really stayed pretty consistently around that 19-20 spot since then. And just a reminder of what this guy did last year. He was the wide receiver 7. He averaged 14.4 points per game. Puka Nacua averaged 14.6. So, like, Puka, we love Puka, had this amazing year. DJ Moore was right there. Puka Nacua had Matthew Stafford throwing him the ball. DJ Moore had Justin Fields, and I always want to call him beignet, like the food. I can't think of what the name of their Bajent or something of their backup. He had, yes, DJ Moore had a 45-point game, which I know people are going to look at that and be like, well, without that game, like what kind of season does he really have? And if you just give him a normal good game in that game, he still would have been the wide receiver 10 last year. Like, just cut that in half, give him a 22-point game. He's still wide receiver 10.
Well, the important thing to talk about that game is it wasn't like he had 3 broken plays like we talk about the George Pickens Week 17 game. He was the only wide receiver with a catch in that game. The only completions Justin Field had against the Washington Commanders were to DJ Moore, and 3 of them were for touchdowns. Like, he was completely unguardable.
Yep. So I think a couple things people are going to ding him on as they look back, they look at that game and think, well, he got propped up by that game. He wasn't really a top 10 quality receiver last year. Also, they have Keenan Allen, they have Rome Odunze. Like, there's too many mouths to feed. Cole Kmet. And, like, I love Rome Odunze, but he's a rookie. Like, I don't know what to expect from him, especially out of the gate. Keenan Allen, have been a huge fan. I'm not saying I buy into he weighs 265 pounds right now, but
he got fat. He's bad.
I do buy into the fact that he is 31, 32. He is often injured. He was injured a lot last season. And if he were to miss time, like, that, number one, great reason to consider Rome Odunze at his cost. Number two, like, I just, DJ Moore, like, is going to be that dude with or without those guys, but he clearly right now is the best option of those guys. And, like, Cole Kmet, just a guy. I don't care about Cole Kmet at tight end in relation to DJ Moore being wide receiver 12 or 20. Like, Cole Kmet's fine to draft as a tight end.
Cole Kmet was losing preseason first team snaps to Gerald Everett. I don't know if we need to be worried. I can hear the buts on this saying Shane Waldron hasn't really been an offensive coordinator who's elevated the talent around him, specifically speaking about Seattle. I would probably say DJ Moore would be the best receiver Seattle's had since Doug Baldwin, and probably even including Doug Baldwin. And even if the Shane Waldron experiment in Chicago doesn't work out well, it's an improvement from the Luke Getsy offense where guys were running into each other 10 yards down the field on routes. So I don't think it can get worse. And as far as passing goes, I don't think you can get much worse than the Justin Fields passing experience last year.
Yeah, so then that's the third thing. It's like, well, he has a rookie quarterback. Like, I don't want to take the number one weapon for a rookie quarterback as a top 15 receiver. And here's the thing. They combined for about 3,400 yards passing, his two quarterbacks last year. That was fifth lowest, I believe, in total yards in the NFL. I wish I wrote that down. I apparently wrote other things down. They were fifth lowest in attempts last season. Oh, here we go. I just wasn't looking in the right place on my notes here. Fifth lowest in attempts with 513. Fifth lowest in passing yards with about 3,400. And then 10th lowest in touchdowns. Now, DJ Moore himself, 136 receptions, 136 targets, 96 receptions, 136 targets or receptions would be crazy. Like those numbers sound really good and they're pretty good, but he was tied for 15th with most targets. So it wasn't like this was a target hog who he was the only guy there. He was still just outside the top 12 in targets and he outproduced the targets that he got. Like, will Caleb Williams have growing pains this year? Of course he will. I'm sure he will. But we're not really pricing in the potential outcome that Caleb Williams is just ready, which he showed that maybe that's possible. And even if he's not, like you said, I have a lot of confidence because of the OC change and just because of the quarterback upgrade that this passing situation from a skill and a volume standpoint is going to be so much improved. And one of the things that DJ Moore does so well is he's a great deep ball guy if he can get the ball. And he's played for such abysmal quarterbacks over his career that has been hit or miss. Like Caleb Williams, while up and down, is going to be able to get him the ball deep more consistently than anybody he's played with. This is just a well-rounded player who potentially is playing with a really, really, really promising quarterback this season. And he had mega boom weeks last year. If he can get more consistent and iron out the weeks where he finished outside the top 36, which he did 7 times. If he can do that and be more consistent, I think there's upside for him to be around where he was last year, even if, the volume isn't quite as consistent or whatever the case may be with a rookie quarterback and weapons around him.
Yeah, and I'm pretty much with you when it comes to DJ Moore. He's being discounted for a bad situation when last year was a worse situation than what he's coming into. And he's consistently been a top fantasy performer with terrible options. And Caleb Williams is probably going to be the best quarterback he's played with of his career. Yeah. He's not really getting a big, price increase despite that.
Yeah, and he doesn't even have to do what he did last year. He just has to, if he's wide receiver 15, which is about I have him at 14. If he's 15, then you feel great about taking that guy 19-20. He doesn't even have to be what he was last year to exceed his price. So I'm in for Dalton. Who's your second, my guy?
Yeah, this one's one we talked about last week, and a guy that it's hard for me to get away from, and I can't stop with Deontay Johnson. So it was pretty exciting last season or this preseason to watch the Carolina Panthers in their one session with Bryce Young.
That was a pretty fun drive, I will say. As far as preseason drives go, I had a good time with that one too.
It was. I mean, they were doing the things that people thought Bryce Young should do in the NFL, like moving him out of the pocket so he doesn't have to watch it collapse and getting him out into motion where he can make those precision throws. And he was doing it pretty effectively. One of the rollouts, I think he threw a 20-yard dot to Deontay Johnson on kind of an over-the-middle route. And it's just hard for me not to take some credit in this Carolina Panthers offense with David Canales. I've spoke about him really glowingly, and I really hope he lives up to it because he's done so well in so many places. And he feeds his wide receiver ones. We've seen it with DK. We've seen it with Mike Evans last year. And I think Deontay just really gets underrated for how talented he is as a wide receiver. Yep. Obviously, he had all greens on the reception perception report. He's just played with some of the worst starting quarterback play of any talented wide receiver.
Yeah, and he's number one on ESPN's open score for the last 2 years. So he just gets open.
Yeah, I mean, you have the ghost of Big Ben and then a bunch of retreads and Kenny Pickett in Pittsburgh. And you just look at his career thus far, and the guy has done nothing but produced. He has the 10th most targets through 4 seasons. He had the second highest target season of all time. And last year alone, he had his highest PFF grade. Despite the production that was on the field. PFF graded him highly. And then he has a 1.97 yards per route run. So there's really no getting away from me when he's being taken as the wide receiver 35 right now. It's just so low for a player who is surrounded by a lot of players that he's much, much better than. And I'm going to take him as much as I can. Now, it is an interesting spot.
He's actually 38 on Fantasy Pro, so even better for your purposes.
Even better. I mean, some of the guys around him are interesting, like Tank Dell and Xavier Worthy, because they're kind of what do we get out of them? But then you have like Christian Watson around there and Christian Kirk, who I'm a fan of Christian Kirk, but I mean, he's just a lesser version of Deontay Johnson in a lot of ways.
I still think I would take Christian Kirk over Deontay, so I can't quite go that far. But
am I hearing that?
I mean, yeah, we can Christian Kirk versus Deontay Johnson straight up.
Let's do it.
Alrighty, I'll get on the board while you keep
total
talking.
Scoring or points per game, because Christian Kirk's currently injured.
I think he's back, right?
I don't know if he's back. I just knew he had a calf injury for a while.
I think he returned the practice, or like they said, he will be returned. I don't know. Whatever you want to do, I'm good with.
We could just do total points.
Okay. But
the likelihood of either of them missing time is high. So
yeah, that's probably true. And you know, I'm with you because he was obviously a sleeper for me, and kind of my thing with him, like it's the cheapest wide receiver one you can get, and he very clearly is the wide receiver one, both just on situation and talent. And what if Bryce Young is decent this year? Which there's, you know, I think we have discussed this plenty. We think there's a chance that happens. So I'm with you there. My sort of on the same train of thought here. Now, I think Deontay is a better player than this player, but my line of thought of getting a very cheap wide receiver one is taking me to Calvin Ridley in Tennessee, who we have not really talked about much on this show other than like passing blows at Will Levis here and there. Like we don't really love Will Levis. I think that's pretty well established. But like, here's the thing. You know, I have Ridley 27. He's going wide receiver 35. We did talk a lot earlier in the offseason about how terribly the Jags used him last season. I mean, his reception perception profile from Matt Harmon, he is like 82% of the time out of the X spot in his sampled games. And that is not like in Atlanta in his best years, he was more like 50-50. And the thing that he is by far the worst at, like he is pretty good against man, and he's a little bit better than that against zone. He's really not very good against press coverage. So what do the Jaguars do? They stick him out there, let him get pressed into oblivion, playing with a quarterback who is getting absolutely blitzed because he's playing behind a terrible offensive line. They can't get anything going in the run game later in the season because the O-line is in shambles. You know, Christian Kirk is out. Instead of having Calvin Ridley do some other stuff, it's like, no, let's still look. We just send him out there. What, you know, he's got to beat his man. And I just think he's going to be used a lot better. I think the Titans actually referenced to that. They know how to use him. They have a so I was like, oh, that's interesting. I think the Titans are kind of on that same train of thought. They weren't a fan of how he was used last year. And they definitely paid him like a guy who they think is better than what he was last season. Now, part of that might just be, you know, demand, and they just wanted to get him. But I do think part of that is they think a better player is still in there. And I do think we have to remember Calvin Ridley went 2 years without playing in the NFL and had a pretty good season last year. I mean, he was a top 20 fantasy receiver. I know that the ride was not the same, like was not a smooth top 20 type of ride. This is a hilarious stat from the fantasy footballers. Dalton, do you have any idea how many games Calvin Ridley finished as a wide receiver 2 last year? So on a week-to-week basis, how many times did he finish in between wide receiver 13 and 24 in scoring?
How many?
0. He never finished between 13 and 24, but he finished the season as wide receiver 17. So, of course, what does that tell us? He was a wide receiver 1 in 35% of his games, but he had many games where he just couldn't use him, or he was a flex play at best. Like if he didn't blow up, you were thrilled if he was the wide receiver 35 that week, because it was very up and down. But I think the Titans have a chance to throw the ball more this year than they have. Like I think maybe part of this is the bad taste in our mouths. Like part of his price is the bad taste in our mouths because of the up and down nature of his season last year. Part of it is we're not Will Levis fans, and I think that that's a fine thing to be concerned about, but he doesn't have to be a great NFL quarterback for Ridley to deliver on wide receiver 35 ADP. Like Will Levis is a guy who likes throwing the ball downfield. I think Calvin Ridley will probably be the number one target as far as that goes in this offense. And I mean, Brian Callahan, you can say it's because he had Joe Burrow, but the Bengals have been top half of the league since 2019 in pass rate. And I do think that just like in our minds, we think of the Titans as, they're the Titans. They don't throw the ball. Well, obviously it's different coaching, different system, all that this season. And even last year when Joe Burrow was not out there very much. And when he was mostly immobile and just a shell of himself. They were second in the NFL in pass play rate last season. So I think they're going to throw the ball. It may not be that much, but it's going to look different than it has there because of the new coaches, because of no Derrick Henry. Like, I just think this is kind of along the vein of Deontay Johnson. This is a good chance to get the wide receiver one. And I do believe, even with DeAndre Hopkins there, this is the wide receiver one on this team for a very cheap price. And he just has to be like, if he's close to what he was, even if he's inconsistent, but finishes as wide receiver 25, good pick at wide receiver 35. Like I'm in on the price, even though I can admit, like, I understand why people feel shaky about Will Levis and the Titans.
Yeah, the first thing I'll say is we haven't really seen offensive coordinator with the Tennessee Titans, Alex Van Pelt, call plays, which is a big concern. And so I think we're 7 for 7 on mentioning Alex Van Pelt on this.
I've done it like twice. You are really putting the team on your back as far as that.
You put the Titans on here. You gave me the opening. But no, I mean, the concern with me really is Will Levis had the second highest sack rate of any quarterback last year, only getting beaten out by the great Sam Howell and close to tied with Justin Fields, which isn't a good look for him. And you look at Will Levis and he loves to throw the deep ball and has no pocket awareness. And I just don't know what the bottom looks like for this offense if he's not successful. I think they'll be good running the ball. I don't know how they're going to get Calvin Ridley utilized effectively as well. Part of my concern is Hopkins obviously going to miss a few weeks, it sounds like. But between Hopkins, now Boyd, and Calvin Ridley, all three of those guys really belong in that slot role, and they're probably going to have different formations where each guy gets theirs. But are you muted?
I was muted. Thank you. There's ways to do things where you can move guys around, in motion, where you can have someone playing the X role, but just like, flanker X. Like don't let Ridley get pressed every other play at least this whole season. And I think that I would assume they're gonna do that because you can't watch Calvin Ridley against press coverage and say, yeah, this is $92 million right here.
And I hope that's not the case, but those are just my concerns where if this offense doesn't get off the ground well, he's going to be impacted by it. And I just don't know if Will Levis takes that step forward. He certainly could, but between that and then some of the JC Latham not great preseason plays leave me concerned that this line could still be a bit of a problem for them.
It could be, but I think it'll be better than last year, which is not saying much, of course. Dakota says in chat 2 things. Number 1, advanced. And number 2, maybe Ridley should hit the weight room. So I have to pass that on to Calvin. Dalton, who is your third my guy?
My third one is a guy who has been oftentimes hated on this podcast, but he's come down to a price that's appropriate for him in a situation that's much better for him, and that is Najee Harris. So the keys to fantasy football are you want a workhorse running back, you want goal line touches, and if you're going to have a running back who can't catch passes, that team better run the hell out of the ball. All of those check the box for Najee Harris. Before I go any farther, none of this is meant to be one, like worried about Jalen Warren's hamstring. Two, saying Jalen Warren also is a good pick because he is a good pick. This simply is, I really like where Najee Harris sits at in fantasy value at RB23 because you can take 4 elite wide receivers and a quarterback and come into the 6th round and get Najee Harris. And you're getting yourself a guy who's going to get 60 to 65%, maybe 55% of the snap share in an offense that we know is going to run the ball with like enough data that I'm willing to bet that they'll be near the top of the league in rush rate. First of all, this team does not care who's playing wide receiver outside of George Pickens. That's pretty clear considering their moves, unless Brandon Ayuk really shocks the world and ends up there. But Arthur Smith, his last 2 years in Atlanta, was first in the NFL in rush rate over expectation. Going back to him as the OC for the Tennessee Titans in 2020 and 2021, Arthur Smith's offense ran a ton of run-heavy offenses that were all keyed around efficient passes to A.J. Brown. During that time, I know it's Derrick Henry, but he rushed for his career high over 2 seasons for over 2,000 yards. And there's just not a lot that leads me to believe the Steelers don't want to run the ball. They've heavily invested in the offensive line. 3 of their picks in this draft were offensive linemen. They're going to play heavy personnel. Their first personnel they drew out on the field this last preseason game was 13. They had 3 tight ends on the field and George Pickens. Like, there's going to be a ton of opportunity for Najee Harris, and there's going to be a ton of goal line opportunities in this offense. And their defense is good enough that they're going to beat a lot of games where Arthur Smith's going to say, we're only down by 7. Let's run the ball, because we all remember them being down 31-7 to Tampa Bay, and Arthur Smith still ran 3 straight plays to come out of the drive. So this is a guy who's dedicated to running the ball, and we know Mike Tomlin's not a coach who takes a lot of the offensive coordinating roles based on what Matt Canada did there for 2 years. So there's such a loose like expectation that Najee Harris is let down because we thought he was a top 10 running back. Not we, but a lot of people did. But now he's being drafted like close to where his floor is in an offense that's going to rely on him heavily.
Yeah, so I'm interested in like I'm interested in the school of thought that if you go receiver early and like Najee is one of your guys you take, I'm good with that, and I'm good with like targeting him heavily in that regard. I'm fine taking him in general. I'm just not sure, like, as far as my guys go, like, I'm not sure I'm targeting him heavily like that, like I think you are, just because I think he has, I don't want to say a low ceiling, but like, I'd be floored if he finished above like running back 15 this year. Whereas like guys around him, I think you can make the case have a higher ceiling. So if you're kind of shooting for the moon a little bit, he's not a guy to take, of course. Safety wise, like I think he's pretty safe. My one concern would just be like Jalen Warren, since we last talked, it seems like he's going to play week 1. Seems like he's pretty much fine. I mean, we'll see what happens with that. But like, there is at least a possibility that Jalen Warren, I'm not going to say takes the job, but there's a possibility that he's the 55 and Najee's the 45. Like, that could happen. I don't know if I'm predicting that, but like, that could happen. And I think we agree that Warren is at least the better player. So I think that is also the other thing that gives me a little bit of pause. Like, I'm looking back at the snap counts last year. They were pretty close. There were some games where Warren played more, and they played together some too, so it makes their snap counts a little bit funky. But total, it was 606 for Najee, 546 for Warren. So that's probably the safest bet, is to expect pretty close to a 50-50 between the two.
Yeah, the first thing I'll say is you're right, especially with Arthur Smith as the coach. This running back room could be anybody, including Cordarrelle Patterson. But I think that there's a good likelihood that Najee Harris is like top 5 in red zone touches among running backs come week 12 or 13. Where when this team gets in the red zone, they're not going to give the ball to Russ. And if Justin Fields is playing, they're not going to give the ball to Russ. They're going to ask their running game to be the effective mover of that ball and getting them into those good looks in the red zone. And when you think about that, there's also a high likelihood, and this is true for either of these backs, that they can get significant touchdown equity out of this offense, where I don't think a lot of touchdowns are going to many people in the pass game, except for like some weird curl routes to the Muth. on like
they're gonna have to be pretty big windows for Russ to want to throw it.
Yes. So I mean, I could have put both of them here, and it feels like a cop out to have done that. So I picked one of the guys, and I just wanted to avoid Lauren already has a hamstring injury, and he's a smaller back argument. So I really took Najee because I still think 15 to 16 carries a game and 3 or 4 targets. It's a pretty good outcome for where his price is.
Yeah, agreed. Not gonna fight you too hard on it. So James Cook, my guy. I have him pretty much. I'm in line with ADP. He's running back 14. I have him 13, but he's just a guy that the more drafts I do, I just kind of feel myself gravitating to a little bit. He had an up and down year a little bit last year. Early in the season, he was benched in the doghouse with me a little bit. Had a soft fumble. I feel like I remember in their opener when they did lose to the Jets on the crazy punt return. But here's the thing. He finished last year, even with kind of the up and down season to start. He finished as the running back 12. He had 2 rushing touchdowns last year, and he finished as the running back 12. He had 4 receiving, so he had 6 total touchdowns, which that in itself isn't crazy. But for a guy to get the carries that he was getting and to have 2 rushing touchdowns is crazy. And I know he's probably never going to be a crazy high touchdown guy in Buffalo, because Josh Allen's there. He'd have to have an outlier season himself to do that. But Josh Allen had 15 rushing touchdowns last season. He's never had 10 rushing touchdowns until last year. So my money is on that number is probably coming down. And he's pretty involved in the passing game. 44 receptions, about 450 yards. Like I said, 4 touchdowns. Obviously, a lot of these vacated targets are going to either Kincaid or the receivers. Maybe Dawson Knox steps up a little bit, whatever. But the Bills do vacate 284 targets. It's not crazy to think that James Cook could take a little bit of a step forward in the passing game. And remember, this is a guy in college who actually did line up at receiver some. Now, I'm not going to lean into, he's going to be in the slot. It's going to be great. But just he should get more involved in the passing game based on how this offense has changed from last year to this year. Now, will that happen? We'll see. But even if it's the same as last year, that's pretty good. And if you look post offensive coordinator change, where everyone thinks they went to this whole new level offensively, they didn't, but they definitely changed, and the running game definitely was a huge part of their offense for the last 6 or 8 games of the season. Post OC change, here are his carries: 17, 16, 10, weirdly, against the Chiefs, only had 10 carries. 25, that's the Cowboys game that we all remember. It was 25 carries for 180 yards, and Josh Allen completed 7 passes in that game. 20, 16, and 13. He also had 22 touches in both their playoff games back-to-back. He was the running back 7 in that stretch of regular season games that I mentioned. And again, that was with 4 touchdowns total, 1 touchdown in that stretch. So it wasn't like he was red hot touchdowns. He just didn't have those at any point really last season. His rate of rushes of more than 15 yards last season was the best in the NFL. He is an explosive player, a capable pass catcher, the unquestioned number 1 in the Bills offense. That's shaky at receiver. I don't want to say what am I missing here, because I have him priced about where the market does, but I just really like James Cook in this range as your rock solid RB2, or if you went receiver, a little bit earlier, I feel very, very good with him as my running back 1, because I just think his floor is really, really good. And I can see a world where he is the running back 5 if things do really go perfectly for him this year.
Yeah, and it's interesting looking at the Bills ADPs because outside of Kincaid, a lot of guys aren't priced as a high-owned asset, but Josh Allen is. Mm-hmm. And I know Josh Allen does a lot and gets a lot of touchdowns on his own, but it's going to be an offense that's going to move the ball up and down the field without a lot of struggle because of how good Josh Allen is. And since Joe Brady took over this offense, yes, they got worse in a lot of ways, but they really wanted to run the damn ball.
Yeah.
And they're going to do that this year because that's what Joe Brady did in Carolina when he was there. It's his offensive philosophy. And they really brought Joe Brady in because they wanted to mitigate the Josh Allen turnovers. And that doesn't happen when you pass the ball. It happens when you have short and easy passes and you run the ball. And both of those are in James Cook's skill set. I think the only like slight to James Cook is Ray Davis in this backfield, who looked good in the preseason.
Yeah.
It's the preseason, and he's a rookie. So there's a lot of mystery up in the air. But other than that, he's really unchallenged for like a lead role at like 80%. And if the receivers
even if he gets 70%, that is good enough to be exactly what you need him to be in fantasy at the price.
Yeah. And if this receiving room doesn't work out, which we've seen other teams, the Chiefs, try this, where their receiver rooms don't work out when they're trying to kind of piecemeal it together, the screen game becomes even more important. And that's somewhere where James Cook has really excelled. I mean, he's an excellent pass catcher. His running game was the concern coming into the NFL. And we're pretty sure he's a lockdown role for that already.
Yeah, and it's funny you mentioned the Chiefs because like Pacheco had his best season by far, obviously last year as a fantasy player, only out 2 seasons. But I thought about Pacheco as a my guy, and I kind of thought about he and Cook in the same vein. So I was like, I'll choose Cook over Pacheco in this range. But like Pacheco easily could have been a my guy here, and he entered last season with a lot of the same circumstances, like you just said, and it went really well. And I love Pacheco. I do think James Cook is probably a little more talented than Pacheco. Pacheco does certain things better than Cook for sure, but like especially like as a guy in the passing game, I think James Cook has a little more upside than Pacheco does.
Yeah, no, most definitely, and I would agree with that.
Okay, your last my guy, Dalton.
This was going to be George Kittle, but
you changed it on me.
Yeah, I had a flash of brilliance thinking about this,
and
he's kind of gotten buried in people's rankings, and just buried in general because he's not the third wide receiver on this team right now.
We're gonna risk a guy who gets benched right here. I can feel it.
We are going to go with Jermaine Burton. So this guy did nothing in the preseason but proved to me that he had the skills to be an NFL receiver. It came with the second and the third team pretty consistently, but he was always open. He was always scoring. He finished third in the NFL in preseason yards. Despite that, he only played 30% of the snaps. The guy who finished first, A.T. Perry, played 58% of the team snaps. So, and he was only off by 18 yards. So it's not like they went far and above and crushed it. But for a rookie to come out and do that, I'm already pretty excited. I'm not going to mention the Jamar Chase stuff here, but like if anything funky happens there, he is an immediate starting spot on this roster. And
yeah, and the main concern right now probably is is it Lovis? What's the name of the
Andre Iosivas is
Iosivas.
The concern. I'm just going to be honest with you. I don't think he's that good. I think he's a fine rotational player. Mm-hmm. I think Jermaine Burton is just better at football, and it's going to take some time for him to get into this offense because
we'll just have to see if mentally and just behaviorally he's up to the task.
Yes, and that's the problem. But if he starts eking his way on the field and eating into these 3 wide receiver sets, by the way, the Bengals ran the 5th most 3 wide receiver sets of any team in the NFL last year. So
well, like I said, they were second in pass rate, and Jake Browning played half the season, and Joe Burrow played about a third of the season on one leg.
Yes. So there's plenty of volume there. This offense easily supported 3 wide receivers when Tyler Boyd was there. And I think Jermaine Burton's talent right now is better than Tyler Boyd's ever was in the NFL. He still has a lot to prove off the field. But like we've talked about before, this was also a player that a lot of people who study the draft thought was going to go much later because of the off-field concerns, and the Bengals took him much earlier than people expected. And he so well plays all 3 positions that if Chase or Higgins or Iosivas go down, he's going to be able to fill the role successfully. He just really needs to keep it together off the field. And I'm okay with betting on that because there's enough leadership. I'm going to use that word in quotes here because I don't know if there is leadership in this locker room. There should be at this point, considering where this team has been.
I mean, I think you can say Joe Burrow is a good leader. I think
yes, that he is going to get acclimated to the NFL, and he's going to be one of those guys where, like weeks 5 or 6, I'm going to be telling you, get on the waiver wire, pick him up. He's now at a 60% snap share. It's all a matter of time. And I just want to be ahead of it because his ADP is so low right now compared to some other wide receivers who I think he is as talented, if not more talented, as in this class.
Yeah, and you could easily tell me a story where the way it goes this year for him is he does not play for the first month, and then he slowly kind of works his way on the field, and then he beats out, Ilyasova, week 7, week 8, whatever the case may be, and then he is like a top 40 receiver for the last 8 weeks, top 30, like that. That's like the optimistic case, I think. For Burton, the most optimistic is he's just like he beats him out right away. But I do think you have to give it time for him to, number one, like learn the offense, learn how to play, gain the trust of Joe Burrow. Like all those things for a lot of rookies take time. And then, of course, like we've talked about a lot, this is a guy who, if he were not a head case, he would have been a first round pick, maybe early second round pick, like late first, early second in the NFL draft. And I mean, if he's able to put it all together, the talent's definitely there. And you have made me very excited about my taxi team this year, Dalton, in our dynasty.
Well, and he's ranked at wide receiver 78, so I could see some people saying this is a cop out. But like, I think he can finish as a top 40 wide receiver pretty handedly. And some of the names above him, like Troy Franklin, going above him, are head scratchers.
He's maybe faring worse on his own depth chart than Burton right now, and he's in Denver, which, I mean, I know Bo Nix is amazing, guys, but come on.
Yeah, well, like Keon.
Remember how good Kenny Pickett was last year? I know that in the preseason that worked out great, right?
Oh, that's why he's on a new team. They traded for him. He was so good. But like Keon Coleman is almost 30 spots above him. Both guys are probably wide receiver 3s on their team. And I think I like Burton more than, like, if I was sitting in a draft in the 10th round and they were both there, I would take Burton over Keon Coleman.
Really? I would still take Coleman, but if you're just talking about, if you just asked, if I was doing like a fantasy draft on Madden, I would pick Burton over Coleman as a receiver. But like right now, I would take Coleman in fantasy.
Yeah, I feel pretty strongly about Jermaine Burton. I think he was more talented than Ladd McConkey, but he steps into a better situation than Burton.
Okay, Dalton went to the very bottom of the board, maybe even below the bottom of the board for his last one. I am going close to the top. I think you should be closer to the top than what he already is right now. And, I had Josh Jacobs down a month ago. I started this doc and I put him down a month ago. And then A.J. Dillon got hurt, and now he's probably going to be a lot more popular. But Josh Jacobs was my guy 4 years ago, first of all. But even before the A.J. Dillon news, he was my guy. And I have these fun little stats as it relates to Marshawn Lloyd, because I think that's been one of the negatives associated with Jacobs is like, there's Marshawn Lloyd, like he looks really good, like he's really talented. How much is he going to get the ball? Jacobs has never had someone really very good playing with him in the backfield. So Matt Waldman, the past 6 years, looked at the top 60 running backs during that stretch of time. Running backs who didn't at least do better than one fumble every 60 touches, so have less than one fumble every 60 touches. Only 3% of them ever earned elite fantasy production. Only 10% of them ever reached running back 1. And the most relevant point is very few of them were, quote, not much higher, is what he said, than a running back 2. And we've talked about, like, Marshawn Lloyd fumbling is a huge issue for him. It was in college. I mean, we'll see in the NFL, but like he has a ball security problem. He is kind of in that DeAndre Swift of, he likes to bounce things to the outside and use his athletic ability. Maybe he, can learn and get over that, but I have my doubts if that's going to translate right away, and he's going to be a between the tackles guy right away. So, like, I have my doubts about Marshawn Lloyd. Now there's no A.J. Dillon, and I feel, even stronger about this. Like, Josh Jacobs, when I looked earlier, ADP running back 12. I have him at running back 6. And, like, Dalton got this very handy NFL Plus subscription where we can watch all 22. So I was like, what better player for me to watch than Josh Jacobs for my first all 22 experience leading up to the pod. So I mercifully went back and watched all of his carries from 2 Raiders games last year. And then I went back and watched all of his carries from a game the year before where he was like a top 3 running back. I mean, I'm not going to say I'm some well-trained film analyst, but I think that all of us who watch football at least have some modicum of ball knowing ability when it comes to if a guy is good or not, if you watch the games. And I don't really think he looked much different last year than the year before. It's just, and I took a ton of screenshots and I was like, I don't even want to put these up on the YouTube. But there are so many times where he is met in the backfield or at the line of scrimmage. Like, it's hilarious. In the Packers game, they handed him the ball like 3 straight first downs. And it's like the Packers knew exactly what you guys are running every first down, guys. They have 8 guys in the box. They're blitzing. They're bringing 7. Like, he is getting met 3 yards behind the line of scrimmage on back-to-back-to-back first downs. Like, what are we doing? So that there was just so much bad situation. I mean, just think about it. Quarterback gets benched, coach gets fired. Like, I mean, O-line was fine, but not great. Team was obviously terrible. Like, the situation was just god-awful for Josh Jacobs. He's coming into a Green Bay Packers situation who, I'm not going to lie to you, in some iteration of these my guys, I had Jaden Reed and Jordan Love. Like, I cycled through all of those guys in this Josh Jacobs spot. Like, we love the Packers. We love Love. We love Reed. Like, Romeo Dubs, like, cool. He's fine. Christian Watson, like the upside, whatever. Dontavian Wicks. Everybody loves Dontavian Wicks. Like, love both tight ends. Good offensive line. LaFleur, elite offensive coach, elite run game scheme. Like, it is just all lining up for Josh Jacobs to be a smash at running back this year. And I feel like really the only argument against him right now is, and I didn't bring any hard stats for this, but I see the argument all the time about, oh, don't draft Josh Jacobs. Running backs who change teams, do X, Y, Z. And it's like, a lot of times when running backs change teams, they're bad. Like, they're young and bad, and they're being cut, it doesn't matter, whatever. Or they're guys who are old and past their prime and they're just not good anymore. Like, Dalvin Cook went to the Jets from the Vikings, so he is contributing to, the horrendous stats of changing teams of some of these guys. And it's like, Josh Jacobs is still good, guys. Like, I think he's still good, and he's still only like 26 years old. Like, I am just firmly in on the Josh Jacobs experience this year, to the surprise of no one. But, like, unlike previous years, we have a potentially fantastic offense that he gets to be not only a part of, but, like, he could easily be the 80% back in this attack, and he could be the first down guy, the second down guy, the best pass catcher, and the goal line guy. Like, I don't know what more we could want for a potential role for Josh Jacobs this year.
I want you to know, if I type Josh Jacobs into my Google Docs, I have 32 documents mentioning him. And I feel like that says a lot about where we've been on Josh Jacobs. The first thing I'll say is, like, AJ Dillon going down is a huge plus for Jacobs because the running back in this room currently is Emmanuel Wilson. Lloyd missed going on IR, which is a good thing for Lloyd, but there's no way Matt LaFleur can do a 2-headed RB room for the first, like, 5 games of the season. The big knock on Marshawn Lloyd coming out was he basically fumbled once a game.
Yeah.
And if you're an offense that's rolling, the one thing you don't want is mistakes, and that's what Marshawn Lloyd kind of brings to the table. And for a guy that's going to have missed like 3 weeks of practice as a rookie, those are incredibly concerning factors. With all of those, Josh Jacobs looks to be a smash because there's just no.
Yes, Dalton, yes.
What I will say,
no,
is, and this is a trepidation tons of people have. There's that dreaded 400 touch mark that very few running back hits in a season. And Josh Jacobs hit it 2 years ago. The only running back to come back and have a top 20 season was Derrick Henry. Now, a lot of these people like also wouldn't change teams. Like DeMarco Murray was on this list. Todd Gurley was on this list. And then like his knees went away.
And we knew his knees were going away. Like we knew that already.
So like that's maybe like a pause for brief concern, but also Josh Jacobs is by far one of the youngest running backs to do it because he was like 20 when he entered the NFL.
And he has an injury history, but they're all like ankle, shoulder. Like he doesn't have the serious knee or like he doesn't have that stuff going on yet, but like he doesn't have that stuff in his history that we have to be worried about right now.
No, and there's no argument against him with the way this running back room in Green Bay has played out.
Yeah.
And I would be
and the last thing I'll say, to piggyback off that real quick, and I'll let you go. Another thing I see is that Matt LaFleur doesn't give one running back all the touches. Look at what he's done since he's been there. I mean, guys, Aaron Jones and Josh Jacobs are two very different players. Aaron Jones weighs a lot less, gets hurt a lot. Like Josh Jacobs gets hurt sometimes. Aaron Jones gets hurt a lot. Like you got to keep Aaron Jones upright and healthy. And he's just not a guy you want to smash between the tackles over and over. Josh Jacobs, little different story. So like you just can't make that one-to-one comparison because you got to look at the player that has been there this entire time LaFleur has been there.
Yeah, unless the 60-40 split turns into Jaden Reed playing 40% of the running back snaps, there's really not anybody on this roster that I think LaFleur, as an intelligent coach, can put out there. And even if Josh Jacobs is inefficient, this offense won't be, and he's going to get points. It's just I would be really interested to find somebody out there in the universe who could make a case against Josh Jacobs at this point and make one that's compelling.
They're out there. Yeah, compelling, I don't know, but they're out there. I mean, I listed them. Changing teams. Aaron Jones never was a quote-unquote workhorse. Like, they're definitely out there. Or just like Josh Jacobs averaged 3.5 yards per carry, so he's bad last year.
Let me discount this guy from going to the 28th best offense in the NFL to the 7th best offense. I can only see bad things happening if he gets that massive improvement in coaching, in quarterback play, in wide receiver room, in offensive line play. Like, yeah, I don't think there's a good argument you can make against Josh Jacobs at this point. And to anybody listening who's been a longtime listener, you know that if I'm giving the stamp of approval on Josh Jacobs, that you probably need to go out there and draft him. And looking at rankings at this point, like he probably needs to be above Pacheco, probably needs to be like up towards 10 and the 10 and 9 range, probably above Kyron, probably above Etienne. Like
it sounds like you're getting him pretty close to RB6, which is where I have him.
Yeah, well, he's not going above Big Dog, but he can get up there.
All right, that seems like as good a spot to end as Andy Dalton. That is going to do it for episode 150 of the Half Point Per Podcast. Give us a follow on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok at Half Point Per Pod. Subscribe to the YouTube, of course, Half Point Per Podcast on there. Link to all those things in the show notes, as always. And next time we talk to you, we will be 24 hours away from real football. Very, very exciting. I think what we'll do is probably a lot of prop bets next week, and maybe we'll sneak in some dynasty talk next week as well. We'll see. So thank you guys all so much for listening, and we'll talk to you again next week.